Hello ladies and gentlemen, this is Dan Ball and welcome to another episode of the Wellness Academy podcast. On our show here at the Wellness Academy, it is my job to distill all things wellness and attempt to break down from all our different coaches, experts and guests their wisdom and knowledge so you can apply it to your own life. Our guest today is Sophie Medlin. Sophie is a dietitian and was referred to me by one of our previous guests, Richard Enion, and I didn't know fully what to expect from speaking to Sophie. I must admit, I hadn't kind of heard of her before. She's a dietitian. She works for the NHS. She's opened up a new clinic down in London recently. She's not somebody who I would have come across naturally, but amazingly enough, it meant that I had a really surprising, fun, enjoyable, informative, exciting, intelligent, all-round amazing conversation with Sophie. She's an absolute superstar in her field, provided me with some wonderful knowledge, modified some thoughts of mine that I had beforehand, which were based in error. We touch on lots of different bits and pieces for diet, nutrition, for health and longevity. We have a bit of a nod to the recent Game Changers movie and some of the fallout from that and the controversy surrounding it. So yeah, this was a super episode for me. I would love to have Sophie back on, which I'm sure we will do in the future. And as always, I am always hoping that you guys enjoy the show. Help and support where you can. Share, like, subscribe. Let us know how you think, how you get on. And thanks very much, guys, and enjoy the podcast. So, Sophie, welcome to the Wellness Academy podcast. Thank you very, very much for taking time out on a Friday morning to speak with me. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
We were talking just before I pressed record, and obviously I always ask people to give a little bit of a biography about themselves, but we discussed that you, in the past, were unsure of whether or not you had some kind of quote-unquote learning difficulties, because they were becoming more and more obvious to you. But for a while, you're personally, at least, glad you didn't get tested, because it allowed you to set goals and targets and really do well in your career without being held back. But yeah, factoring that in, give us a little bit of an understanding of where you're at now and how you got there and what you do and so on and so forth.
Okay, so my career history is quite long. I'll try and keep it concise, but with that in mind, when I was 13, 14, I was not doing well in school at all. I was predicted kind of D's and E's in my GCSEs. And I just was really struggling in the classroom, couldn't pick anything up, couldn't follow stuff, and was very distracted. I was also, in the park drinking and smoking weed with my friends and doing classic, teenage stuff and not concentrating. But I realised at some point that my dad would be really, really angry with me if I didn't do better than that in my GCSEs.
Okay.
So I taught myself at home. I basically taught myself the whole curriculum at home. And retrospectively, it's pretty obvious that the reason that I could do that was because I wasn't distracted in the classroom. I wasn't distracted by other people. I had a quiet environment, all these kinds of things that now I really need in order to learn. And I ended up with A's and B's in my GCSEs. And then, I was very lucky. Well, worked hard for it, but got there in the end. And I can remember on GCSE results day, I was crying. I held my envelope, hadn't even opened it, and I was crying and crying and crying. And my French teacher, who predicted me, I think a U, came up to me and she was like, "Why are you crying?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm too scared to open my envelope." And she said, "You've got a B in French, open your bloody envelope." And so I pulled it out of the bag, which made me realise that actually I could kind of do whatever I wanted to do. And my catering teacher at GCSE had said to me, have you thought about nutrition? You love food and you like science, and maybe that's the right route for you. So I looked it up and decided actually I want to be a dietitian, and that's what I want to do. So I went to uni straight off to study nutrition and dietetics. So lots of people don't understand the difference between a nutritionist and a dietitian. So the key difference is that nutritionists and dietitians both study the science of nutrition for 3 years, but dietitians go on to apply that to medicine. So to understand how you would use that to treat diseases. So dietitians then almost exclusively go into the NHS, which is exactly what I did. So I worked in the NHS for about 7 years, and I specialise in the nutritional management of colorectal surgery. So you can imagine that every bit of your gut has a slightly different job. And when we cut out different bits of it, that has not only nutritional consequences, but consequences on the experience you have of eating certain foods. So it might be that before we came on, we were talking about broccoli. we all know that broccoli is good for us. But if some people eat broccoli, particularly if they've had some kind of surgery, it can have a big impact on their quality of life and what happens to them in terms of their experience of eating it. So those kinds of things is what I specialise in clinically. I then went on to lecture in, well, basically I was at my last hospital I was working in, and one of my old lecturers came in. And I was like, oh, I'm quite interested in getting into lecturing. You know, what's the path? What do I need to do? And she said, well, actually, we've got a maternity cover post coming up. So why don't you come and see if you like it? So I lectured for 2 days a week and stayed in the NHS for 3 days a week. And then I went fully into academia, and I did that for 5 years. Most recently, my lecturing post was at King's College in London,
Wow.
which is, an amazing institution. And I was very lucky to work there. But it's very much a sort of old school institution in that things are done, whereas at Plymouth, where I was lecturing originally, everything's kind of technical, everything's done online, you have to, like, timetabling's all done electronically and all this kind of stuff, so everything's kind of straightforward. At King's, they still do a lot of things by hand, and you were talking about printing spreadsheets and all this kind of like, so if I moved one lecture, then that had a big knock-on effect. But my brain was like, I don't understand why, like I was just getting things wrong, basic things that should be easy in terms of organising timetables and things like that, I was really struggling with. And I love lecturing and I love being around the students and I love research, but I was really struggling with some really basic stuff that I should have been able to do. And I was talking to my mentor at the time, and she was like, oh, if you were a student and you were saying you're struggling with this stuff, we'd tell you to go and get tested for dyslexia and dyspraxia and whatever, learning difficulties. And I was like, yeah, I feel like I've always kind of known that that's an issue, but I've kind of sidelined it and it's not really held me back until now. So I went and got tested. Turns out I've got dyslexia, dyspraxia, and I've probably also got ADHD. So the full hat trick of everything wrong.
Congratulations.
Wrong with my brain. All these things that, I don't know, but it's been so empowering knowing that, because I was kind of at a stage in my career where I was like, well, am I going to try and do my PhD? Or shall I try and explore some of these other opportunities that are available to me, like private practice, like doing some more science communication stuff, working with the media, doing some consultancy work, product development, that sort of thing. And I was like, actually, I'm going to just put on hold the PhD thing for a bit. That I can always come back to that. Let me explore some of this other stuff. And it's been brilliant. So now I basically only do things that I love and I'm good at, and it makes me really happy, much, much happier than sitting in an office trying to do timetables that I'm crap at. So I quit my job around this time last year, finished in February this year. I'd already sort of been running the business for about 6 months on the side, and now I work completely for myself, which is lovely. And I pay people to do things like accounting, things that I can't do. So it's really nice.
That was going to be what we talked about, like when we chatted before. We said a couple of topics, and I remember in the messages you put, and let's then sort of talk about something positive, but there's a natural segue into the positive bit first and the more negative-y type bit second. So let's do that. You now, like, tell us about what you do now then. You quit your job last year, it ended February. What's been occupying your time since then?
So I design vitamins with companies. So the world of vitamin and product development is the Wild West. People are putting all sorts of crazy things into things and just hoping for the best and hoping that they work. And actually the manufacturers don't really care about efficacy or science, is a massive generalization.
Have you seen the films, the documentaries by, there's two brothers, Mark and Chris Bell? Do those names ring?
Yes. Yeah.
So you know what I'm going to say, right? There was, the first one was Bigger, Stronger, Faster, I think. Yeah. And the second one was, I can't remember the title now, but they did that one about the industry in America and worldwide, of course, of the pharmaceutical, like, medicine. So things that we can go to the doctor. We don't even need to have a prescription for cocodamol, as an example. So codeine and paracetamol. But in America, whilst you can buy humongous amounts of paracetamol, you can't buy codeine you can't without a prescription, because they've got a serious problem with mismanagement and the abuse of pain meds, haven't they? And I think that was what the second documentary was about. But I remember in the first one, he makes a supplement, doesn't he? And he says you can get it past, what is it in America? Is it the FDA?
Yeah.
So if you write just on the package, is it? I think he used the words proprietary something blend. Put in what you want, do whatever you like, and you're allowed to sell it. Like, yeah. So you.
Yes, Yes, more significantly, I guess. So this country, fortunately, because of the EU, which obviously may change, we have quite strict regulations about labeling and what you can and can't put in things, and what is safe and what's okay, and what you can and can't say about things. So we're certainly safer than the US. But when you go, so vitamin manufacture, what I do as a dietitian is research the sort of target market, understand what their nutritional patterns are likely to be like, what things they might be lacking, what things they might want in terms of performance, or what kinds of things they're looking for, and then look at the research that might target some of those things and understand what doses and things would be efficacious. So what's going to work and what's actually going to make a difference to people.
Okay.
What happens is you then take that to the manufacturers who actually put it together, and they'll say things like, well, why don't you just put a little bit of this in there and then you can say this? Why don't you put a bit of this in? Because this is really trendy at the moment. And then you can say this about it and this about it. And it just becomes this sort of can become this very heavily diluted pill that has nothing that's going to make any difference in it, but is just there for marketing claims. So I only work with companies who work in a way that is ethical and that is actually trying to produce results. Okay. I mean, nobody wants to be a faddy vitamin that someone buys once and never buys again, because that's business sense.
Who do you like then? Who do you work with that fits that category, that category for you?
So the company that's closest to being completely ready is a company called Heights, and we've developed a vitamin which is aimed at optimum brain performance, so mental performance. Okay. And in there we've got DHA, which is one of the omega-3s that's essential for the structure of your brain. Yeah. We've got some blueberry extracts. So blueberries are amazing for mental performance, and there's been lots of great research looking at that, and understanding sort of even children's exam performance when they've had blueberry smoothies and things. So we've used some extract from blueberries, which has got some good efficacy in terms of mental performance. And we've got B vitamins, which are really important for the communication between your brain cells. And of course, we're also talking about an audience of people who lots of people will be looking at being more plant-based, maybe have taken dairy out, so there'll be a lower level of general B vitamins available to them. And iodine, which is another important one for mental performance, but also cow's milk is our main source of it. And lots of people have moved away from that now. So yeah, we've got a nice blend of stuff. I've been taking it for a while now. I feel like it's made a big difference to me. But I'm also massively biased because I designed it, and so yeah, we'll see. I mean, it's coming to proper general sale in January, so I'm really excited about that. Website looks great. Okay. Yeah, it's exciting.
One of the things that I've always heard about supplements and stuff, because like I've been doing martial arts, training in it since I was 8 years of age. So some sort of physical activity has been a constant factor in my life. Even if I wasn't at a point where I was training where I used to be, or where I feel like I should be, quote unquote, should be, it's always been in the back of my mind. So I'm one of those people that if I've not been training, my little voice in my head's going, you've not been training. So I've always known. So yeah. Supplements have been something I've looked at for years. Sometimes I take them, sometimes I don't. You get lots of different advice. If you follow Tim Ferriss and you listen to his podcasts and you read his books, some of the things you get suggested to have, you're like, okay, I'll give it a go. But some things you're like, no, I won't. Like one of the things that apparently people want to take more of now, have you heard of metformin?
Yeah.
Have you heard about this? People are now taking metformin for life extending properties, but it's a drug for diabetics.
Yeah.
So if you want to find it for off-label use, that's, I think, in this country at the very least, illegal.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that it's recently become a relatively cheap drug. Yeah, more available or people are trying to make it available publicly. But people are very worried about insulin resistance and very worried about their which is what metformin is for, and very worried about their sort of carbohydrate tolerance and stuff like that. But metformin certainly doesn't come without side effects. And there's risk of liver problems with metformin. So anyone who's ever had any kind of problem with their liver, or drinks heavily, or takes anything else that might put their liver under strain, should not be taking metformin. It's really useful also for women with polycystic ovarian syndrome. So it does have other clinical applications, but it certainly shouldn't be used without the supervision of a doctor.
Exactly. What that got me onto, though, is this idea of the old wives' tale, for want of a better phrase, or myth, is that if you take a vitamin, you don't absorb it. So you pee out the majority of the benefits. So I guess first question, is that true? I mean, you're nodding your head on the video for people that the audio, so I'm assuming that is true.
No. So what I was doing then is acknowledging your point. Okay. Yeah. So I think working clinically in the NHS, very often we were diagnosing and therefore treating vitamin deficiencies. Some nutrients are well absorbed by the GI tract in high quantities if we put them in your mouth, and some are not absorbed well in high quantities if we put them in your mouth. So we put them into your veins or put them into your muscles. So it's certainly not the case that whatever you put in the top end is absorbed in high quantities. Your gut, all along your gut, is these little villi which absorb all the nutrients, and they've got on them little receptors that take in. So say this is magnesium coming down your GI tract, and then you've got a receptor for it. It takes it across your GI tract into your bloodstream. So they kind of have a very simplistic term would be they have similar, like sort of matching shapes, and the shapes pick up the shapes and take them across your GI tract into your bloodstream. It's not quite as straightforward as that, but we'll use that as an example. So you can flood those receptors very easily. So if you put in loads and loads of B vitamins, your receptors will be flooded quite early on, and lots of it just won't be absorbed, and you will just pee.
Your pee is yellow. I've had B vitamins, and you're like, oh my god.
Yeah. So yellow pee, or just you'll poo it out or you'll pee it out one way or the other. It won't be absorbed, or it won't be used in a useful way in any case. So you won't be able to store it. So it might go across your GI tract, but you won't be able to store it, and it will just be peed out or pooed out either way. So there's lots of different parts. So lots of different things you can't absorb very much of, or store very much of, is more the point.
Okay.
And sometimes if you take too much of things, you're really putting your body under lots of pressure to try and flush it out. You're causing yourself more work to do, physical work to do, essentially. But we absolutely can correct deficiencies, lots of deficiencies, with oral administration of vitamins and minerals. So it's not that your body doesn't recognize them. Lots of them won't behave in quite the same way if you take them in an artificial form.
Yeah, because some come with something else, if it's from a food or a vegetable, that actually works well with it to allow your body to use it, is my limited understanding.
Yeah, exactly that. But also we know that things like plant-based sources of calcium often come with oxalates, which bind the calcium and stop you absorbing it. So sometimes there's things in plants that make it less helpful, and sometimes, or foods generally, that make it less easily absorbed. But that's not the case when we put them in a supplement form. So, there's pros and cons.
Okay, so where loads of my limited knowledge of this comes from is like Rhonda Patrick podcasts with Joe Rogan.
Okay, yeah.
Have you heard of Rhonda Patrick?
No, but I've heard of Joe Rogan.
Ro Jogan. I'm calling him that from now on.
Okay, good.
No, so Rhonda Patrick seems to me like you. In this limited time we've spent talking to one another, you're coming across to me like a little bit of the English Rhonda Patrick, which is a compliment. Okay. She's freaking awesome. So it was through her that I learned that even something as simple as the RDA for, let's say, vitamin C, a lot of RDAs is the recommended daily allowance just to survive. But survival based on RDAs does not equal long-term optimal health. So your body, like everyone knows, or I feel like everyone knows that vitamin C deficiency eventually may equal scurvy. Like that's the classic.
Yep.
And I think vitamin D, the eventual negative is rickets. But it isn't, I've got enough vitamin C and D, or I've got scurvy or rickets. Like there's a broad spectrum of things that can go wrong in the human body that you might not know about until you're 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 or 90 or whatever. So if I was going to go, right, vitamin D as an example, living in this country, I mean, the sun's out today, awesome, but it hasn't been up here in the Midlands for the last, it's been chucking it down with rain consistently. So vitamin D deficiency is, as a dietitian, do you have a stat for the prediction of what percentage of our country is deficient for vitamin D?
I don't know if I have a deficiency stat in my head, but I think that I was doing some work the other day, and something like 70% of omnivores don't even get their RDA vitamin D from food. So we can get some from food and some from sunlight, but we know in the UK that sunlight is completely inadequate, particularly during winter months. So ultimately, everybody should be taking a vitamin D supplement over the winter, probably all year round, and especially people who've got darker skin. So the darker your skin, the harder it is for you to absorb enough vitamin D from the sun. So that's really important. And the eventual consequence of chronic vitamin D deficiency in this country, or if we're anywhere, will be osteoporosis.
Okay, so that being said, and we've just talked about how vitamin D supplementation or supplementation in general is a difficult world to navigate.
Yeah.
Let's say we just literally just pick vitamin D. What would your advice be to me if I want to cover that base?
So vitamin D is relatively straightforward in terms of buying it. And you can actually get a mouth spray now, and the absorption of a mouth spray is just as good as the tablets, so that's fine. Basically, I always recommend that people use a brand that they recognise. So it's not like you're just buying something on Amazon that could be coming from anywhere. If you buy from a brand that you recognise, that they're at least putting enough money into their R&D, so their research and development, in order to get you a good product. There's no guarantee of that. But ultimately, if you use a brand that you trust, then you're more likely to be getting, as opposed to just a random company on Amazon, you're likely to get a better outcome.
What bases would you recommend that people cover? So I'm going to be selfish, and I'm going to ask from someone who wants to be recovering from their training effectively. So you mentioned magnesium. I've heard that magnesium, whilst not in the category of protein, creatine, and BCAAs, is massively important for recovery and repair. I actually there's a company called Calm. I buy their magnesium powder. Mm-hmm. Am I doing the right thing there, do you think?
Yeah, that's fine. So we don't absorb very much magnesium from in terms of higher levels from our diet. So in the healthcare system, we would always replace magnesium intravenously if it was getting low. So the chances of you absorbing a vast quantity via the GI tract are not great. And there's no sort of major research that I can think of that would make it particularly beneficial. But obviously electrolyte replacement following training is important, and magnesium is one of those important electrolytes. And sometimes some of these things make people feel better, and we have to ask ourselves, is that enough to warrant you taking it? I think whatever helps you feel better is good.
Speaking of, because it's funny, because we've got this list of things I want to talk about, but I'm really enjoying the fact I've got somebody who actually knows what they're talking about to ask these questions. So another bit that I do, that I've been advised on by people who write books and are on podcasts and so on, is sea salt. Mm-hmm. But the last time I talked to somebody who was a nutritionist about sea salt, and I told them that I was advised to have 2 grams of sea salt, not table salt, sea salt, in my water with a squeeze of lemon juice and drink that first thing, she was mortified that I'd be taking that much salt. But you mentioned about replacing electrolytes and minerals. The old myth, but from a positive, that I've heard is that, for example, the Roman army, the phrase "a man who's worth his salt" comes from they were paid in salt. Yeah. Because it was able to support a marching army because of everything positive that's in actual sea salt rather than table salt. Am I on the right path with that one?
So you've got a couple of issues there. One is that a marching Roman army in Roman sunshine would be sweating a huge amount. And of course, sodium depletion and electrolyte depletion as a result of heavy sweating over an extended period of time can cause you just would lose consciousness. Your body can't function because all of your muscles and everything else needs electrolytes to be able to contract and do their jobs. And of course, your heart's a muscle and your lungs are a muscle. So ultimately, they probably needed a lot of salt to survive what they were going through from a physical perspective. So there's that. Secondly, what we know is that after the huge public health campaigns around salt, where we're trying to reduce salt, not only telling the public to reduce how much salt they were having, but forcing food manufacturers to reduce how much salt was in products, the incidence of things like stroke and heart attacks in this country, which are associated with too much salt, reduced. So we know that too much salt has a negative health impact. It's putting your blood vessels under lots of pressure. So it's causing higher blood pressure, which is a struggle for your heart to cope with. And if that's constant and repeated, then it means that your blood vessels can become less good at retracting, and then they can just become a bit not do their job very well. Yeah. So no, I definitely wouldn't recommend that you put salt in water and drink that every morning. And don't put lemon in it either, because you'll rot your teeth.
Okay. This is now how we get on to the one of our planned discussions of that the vitamin and supplement industry, or even just simply the health and diet industry, is full of contradictory information. So, I mean, if I know there will be a lot of people that do not like the idea of supplements. I'm not always somebody that likes the idea of supplements either. And when we were talking before pressing record about the idea that, diet, nutrition, health is, as you said, somewhere in the middle of everything that you hear.
Yeah.
What would be some of my go-tos in terms of staples of my diet? Like, and feel free to discuss anything that's like, oh my God, I've said this so many times before, it gets boring. But those things tend to be the thing that people switch off from and
Yeah.
don't listen to and therefore miss.
Sure.
So, like, what do you think?
So if you are eating maybe 2 portions of lean protein a day, wherever that's coming from, whether that's coming from meat or fish or eggs, and some plant milk-based alternatives. If you're eating nuts and seeds on a regular basis, if you're eating at least 5 portions of fruit and veg a day, if you're having dairy in your diet, those are kind of, and lots of high fiber foods, then you probably, and you're having like lots of high fiber, either that's like from sprouted vegetables or lots of like very high fiber vegetables, or from various different carbohydrate type foods. You probably don't need any sort of supplement. If you're doing that reliably most days, you don't need to supplement. But most people are either cutting out food groups because they've been told to. So lots of people are being more planty. Lots of people are cutting out dairy. And there are nutritional consequences to removing any food groups from your diet. I even worry about the very low carbohydrate community cutting out all grains and things like that, because it's such a great source of fiber, and our microbiome is so important in our gut. And obviously that's the kind of thing that I'm really interested in clinically. Anytime you're cutting out food groups, you need to think about replacing the nutrients that you've taken out of your diet. Similarly, most of us are leading super high pressure lifestyles where we're bouncing from desk to desk or home to gym to bed to whatever. And often we're relying on food that's perhaps of a much lower nutritional quality than we would like, ideally. And that's where a good quality A to Z multivitamin can be a bit of a safety net. So you definitely don't need to take it all the time. If you're doing well with your diet and everything's on track, that's fine. But if you find that there's a period of time where you are unreliable with your nutritional balance for reasons of things like stress and whatever else. Sorry?
Travel, for example. I went to California for a holiday for 11 days last month, and before I went, I accepted that most of the things I really wanted to do before I went there revolved around where I was going to eat.
Yeah.
I felt like crap.
Yeah.
Before I went, if I'd have remembered to take, it might have helped. It might have helped.
Yeah, and very often when we're under these sorts of periods of really high pressure, and we're not eating so well, our immune system becomes compromised, and then we can get sick, and we pick up bugs more easily. It's a bit like the same. We're coming up to Christmas now, and I think lots of people will be running around, going to Christmas parties, drinking more than they normally would, all these kinds of changes to their lifestyle. At that kind of time, just having a bit of a nutritional safety net is helpful for a lot of people. And it's not 100% necessary. Like if you're still reliable with your eating and drinking, and drinking plenty of water and having lots of fiber and still eating 5 a day and all these kinds of good things, then you're probably fine. But for me personally, having a safety net is a useful thing, and I think it does stop me from getting sick regularly and all those things that we all want to avoid.
With dairy, and obviously there's 2 points. First one, I've heard more and more and more about how positive dairy can be for our diet, but when I've heard those statements being made, they're talking about full fat dairy, and that the problem with dairy comes when it's been pasteurized and homogenized and semi-skimmed, and lots of these positive things get taken away, and that as we were discussing with, let's say, calcium, sometimes calcium comes with things that make it less bioavailable, and sometimes it isn't. But that's the kind of context I heard dairy discussed in, that if it's full fat, it comes with lots of positive. Granted, it's full fat, which isn't always positive, but I've heard that the kind of dairy that we as a human race now seem to consume in quantity, that's why dairy has begun to get, more than begun to get the stigma that it's got.
So when they take fat out of dairy, they literally just scrape the fat off the top. And what you'll find is that lower fat milks actually have more protein in them. They have more calcium in, because ultimately the nutrients are more concentrated. less fat means that there's more of other things. So ultimately, that's not true. So fat certainly helps us to absorb some of the nutrients from cow's milk. So having some fat present is useful in terms of absorption. But what I would say, the thing with dairy is that it's become, we're dependent on it in lots of ways for specific nutrients. So, for example, iodine, we don't talk about very much, but it's completely essential to metabolic function. Really, really important for women of childbearing age, but really important for everybody. And dairy is our main source of it in the UK and has been for a very long time. So when people are cutting it out, we see more and more incidences of iodine deficiency. And, you know, that really is a trend. And I totally understand from an environmental perspective or an ethical perspective, that doesn't sit right for you. But if you think that changing from dairy to some kind of emulsified nut juice is going to be good for you, you've been completely misled. The calcium and the sort of specific mineral profile in dairy, it's not just the calcium on its own that makes it brilliant for our bones. It also comes with vitamin D, it comes with magnesium, it comes with phosphate. And that kind of matrix is really, really great for our bone health in this country. Okay. And you can see from studies that children who have plant milk rather than dairy milk never grow as tall as their dairy milk counterparts, exactly. So we can see all that data there. And, you know, when people say, oh, they don't have any dairy in China and they're fine, it's because they're eating bone broth every day, and the way their diet, the style of eating is completely different. So we just can't extrapolate that information. So it's absolutely not that dairy is essential to human health. What is important is that it's become a big staple of lots of our very important nutrients in this country and for the way that we eat. And taking it out is like removing this kind of powerhouse of nutrition in our diets that we rely on for things like calcium, but also things like iodine, B12 for lots of people as well. We're taking it out and just expecting to be completely fine. And that's simply not the case. And
the difficulty being as well, like, I know that, like, so I use the example of Mars and Snickers, right? So Mars and Snickers bars have started to clock on to the protein bar kind of, like, you know, market.
Yeah.
And they put the word protein on a Mars bar, and then people buy it, forgetting that it's still a Mars bar.
Yeah.
It's not a, do you know what I mean? And I think maybe something similar happens with milk, and you can, like I say, feel free to disagree with me. If I'm wrong, I would much rather you did. But like the perception can be, oh, it's milk, therefore I get what I lose from drinking cow's milk. But like you say, whilst we can market get your calcium, they can't market get your calcium, phosphate, vitamin. They're not going to write that on a packaging because it's not attractive and pretty for a consumer to buy.
So there's a couple of things to mention on that note, and you're completely right. So that first of all, in 2016, which was kind of like the height of the vegan movement, I guess, in terms of being very aggressive, the Osteoporosis Association released a press release that said that plant milks were a ticking time bomb for teenagers' bone health. It was so aggressively received by the vegan community that they withdrew it. So the best scientists in the whole country who look at bone health wrote this press release, came together, were very, very concerned, continue to be very concerned, but they were shouted down by an angry mob who disagreed with them. And that's been withdrawn and they won't talk about it. And I find that so terrifying. So there's that. But also I think companies are cottoning onto these things. There is a company who are making plant-based milk. So they're making coconut milk that has been fortified with all of the 9 nutrients that dairy gives us. So there's 9 key nutrients in dairy that we rely on. And this company have produced a coconut milk with those 9 nutrients in it. It's called Super 9. So people are cottoning on, but other companies are purposefully not fortifying their plant milks because their consumers say, no, we want it to be completely natural. And of course, plant-based diets rely on fortification in order to be nutritionally adequate. And so when you're saying, oh no, we want it to be completely natural and not have anything artificial in it, you're actually taking out a lot of the fortification, which is something that's nutritionally essential for lots of people.
I feel like, considering we talked about this again off kind of recording, and with the topic that we're having, I'd be just doing so because I'm essentially like sat here in my office, scared of what, like, oh, please don't talk about game changing. So one thing I will say is that I attempted to be vegan for a while and initially really enjoyed it. And part of what stopped me from doing it was that I personally found it very easy to go, oh, I'll have that. It's vegan. For example, Oreos. Like, I was like, oh, Oreos are vegan. And my brain ridiculously was going, yeah, so it's okay then. But that's not the truth. Obviously, it's an Oreo. There's a significant amount of calories in every single tiny biscuit. Same thing with like Lotus Biscoff spread, I think, back in the day, like, or whatever it is. And I think more and more research is seemingly being done, probably since 2016, 2015, or at least more and more research is becoming, it gets released, doesn't it? Because people don't release these studies until their scientists don't release their studies, should I be specific, until they're certain about their findings. I was listening to, I haven't watched the film, I haven't watched the Game Changers film, because I don't personally believe that the vegan diet is easy to follow if you're going to do it properly, because it requires so much research, so much supplementation, so much understanding of an arena of life that I try and understand small bits. And even on this podcast, we've been doing like 37 minutes. I've already got two or three things wrong. Do you know what I mean? And like, that's just in a 30-minute conversation, let alone something like my health, which is very, very important to me. You can do it.
Yeah.
You can be a vegan. You can cover all the bases, but you have to be unbelievably diligent. And like you've already said as well, we go back and forth between this crazy busy life of the gym, work, socializing, bed, children, work, having a partner who we want to be a good boyfriend, girlfriend, significant other, whatever, that to put that much pressure on researching what you're going to eat, unless you're willing to do it, you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
But that being said, what have you watched the film?
I haven't watched the film, and I'm glad we're calling it a film and not a documentary, because that's far more appropriate for it. It's a tricky one because it's causing lots of consternation. One of the things that we should say early doors is that James Cameron has a big financial interest in vegan products.
He's got a pea protein company, right?
Exactly, and he's got lots of books and things like that he's sponsored. So ultimately, anyone who has a big financial interest in proving themselves right and who has a huge budget and is capable of making very compelling movies, there's already a huge bias there that hopefully most people can understand and appreciate. I did some social media content about how McDonald's have got loads and loads of money, and I know almost all of my nutritional scientists buddies and friends and people who I've worked with at that some of the best institutions in the country, in Europe, whatever, everyone eats McDonald's sometimes. It's just part of, it can be part of a balanced diet. It's not that it's poison or toxic. Usain Bolt is famous for running on chicken nuggets. If McDonald's wanted to sponsor a documentary that proved that eating McDonald's was good for nutritional science and good for running and whatever else, they absolutely could. Most people who are not vegan and who do high level athletics or anything like that will sometimes have McDonald's in their diet. It's not the McDonald's that makes them good. It's not that. It's the overall balance. It's the training. It's all the other things that go into it. So I think we have to have some level of appreciation for what someone's trying to tell us and what their interest in that is and why they're trying to tell us those things. Because these documentaries that we now get on Netflix are so hyperbolic in the way that they put things across. And we just
hyperbolic mean, sorry.
So overstated,
right.
Intended to get a big reaction.
Okay.
And we've not been exposed to that in this country before, but that's been the American documentary making style for a very long time.
Interestingly enough as well, a point I heard made was that, again, and I can't back this up, but I found it quite interesting, that the timing of when the documentary came out and was made, James Cameron got Arnold Schwarzenegger on the documentary. I think James Cameron also directed the recent Terminator film.
Oh, nice. That's good. Yeah.
So there's definitely not any kind of plausible link there that motivated Arnold Schwarzenegger to go on. And again, you talk about things that people forget when they're being presented with a very, 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 very well-made film.
Yeah.
Arnie says you do not need meat to be strong, but Arnie used meat to be strong for a very, very long time.
Probably on steroids, so...
He built his entire career on meat and steroids and working his arse off. Let's not forget that.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
I couldn't eat the meat and steroids.
I don't know that he definitely took steroids. I'm assuming, which I probably shouldn't do. So we should probably.
I think it's well known that he took steroids.
Okay, good.
I think it's pretty well known that he took steroids. But again, I don't know for certain either. I wasn't there watching him. But yeah, so as far as the film goes, I think we don't need to go into huge detail about it, but I think one important overall distinction that can be made is that there are positives to planet Earth for like the human race and planet Earth as a whole, to changing the current path that we're on. But that path is, I don't believe, going to be changed by everybody having a plant-based diet, like a vegan diet. But if someone sat listening to this is then going, oh my God, did you listen to that Dan Ball on Wellness Academy and that's Sophie? They're anti-vegan. That's not the case. It's just my personal opinion is if it was proven to be the best diet, probably would be doing it by now. But omnivorous eating is the best way to go from a dietitian's point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. From a dietary balance perspective, from a sort of nutritional perspective, a well-balanced omnivorous diet is the way to eat from a nutritional perspective. So a poorly balanced vegan diet is dangerous, and a poorly balanced omnivorous diet is dangerous. If you're eating, I don't know, bacon for breakfast and ham for lunch and sausages for dinner, of course you're not going to enjoy good health.
You've been watching my diet the last few weeks. How dare you?
I'm spying on you. But if you're eating plants for breakfast, plants for lunch, and some animal protein in the evening, and you're having some animal protein through the day, I think you're on the right track in terms of balance. Everyone should eat more plants. Should everyone cut everything else out? No. Should we be putting this moral pressure on people who are struggling and just managing to survive to raise their children as vegans? Absolutely not. I've worked in the NHS. I've worked in the NHS for long enough to know that lots of people are just about managing, and to add in the added pressure of thinking that there's some kind of terrible murderer if they rely on foods that are culturally significant to them and that they can access easily and they know how to cook. We're just going down a road that's so unhelpful and causing people way more distress. So for some individuals, let me take a step back. If people are talking about wanting to become a vegan, what's really important to me is to understand why, so that I can talk to them about the sort of pros and cons, I guess. And if it's environmental, then yeah, fine, do that. But also think about the impact of the supplement industry on the environment and manufactured nutritional components that you're going to have to take. And is that positive or is that negative? Almond milk is obviously a huge burden to the planet as well. Palm oil is in almost all vegan products. I'm talking about vegan products as opposed to vegan food necessarily. And that's terrible for the environment. Whereas if you had some free range eggs a couple of times a week and maybe some wild salmon a couple of times a week, how does that sit with your kind of ethics in terms of the environment, and how does that feel? And arguably, if that means that you don't have to supplement your diet, you're probably balancing things out appropriately for yourself from an environmental perspective. If it's nutritional, then it's just not the best route. It's not the best route for you. So let's talk about how we could balance it in a way that feels right for you and is the best route for you. And if your motivation is ethical and it's causing you distress to even imagine eating any animal products, absolutely, let's get it out and let's make sure you're well, and let's do that in a way that completely sits well with you and you feel that you can sleep easily at night and you feel that you're doing the right thing for you as an individual. Most people, that's not the case for them. Most people are doing it for reasons that sort of are questionable. But if it's ethical, then I'm completely on your team and I'll absolutely support you to make your diet something that doesn't cause you distress, because that's the right thing for you.
I know that I talked to you about this before another thing we talked about before we started recording, that I'm not a scientist. I don't claim to be one. I listen to lots and lots of different people talk about lots and lots of different things, and I try and pick the things that seem to personally sit right with me. Some things that I've learned, I've then had to go, oh yeah, I was wrong there, right? It's part of being a human. But I remember I watched Cowspiracy, which was the original kind of vegan documentary, probably the one that came out around the time you were discussing, like 2015, 2016.
Yeah.
And one of the things that stuck with me from that film was this discussion that the agricultural industry is what is causing global warming more than the automotive industry.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a discussion around how much water it takes to make a beef burger, and also how many greenhouse gases were being like formed or whatever the word is by the agricultural industry versus the automotive. So Joe Rogan had a gentleman named Chris Kresser on the podcast. I was listening to it over the last several days, and one of the things that he was discussing was that the calculation made for how much greenhouse gas there is produced by the agricultural industry, they take the entire life cycle to make that number.
Okay.
But apparently, to form the number made from the automotive industry, they just take exhaust fumes.
Okay.
They don't take the entire life cycle of the automotive industry. Or it might be the other way around. I might have explained that really badly. But my point is,
kind of makes sense, and I think it's
my point is that it's not actually as cut and dry as I was originally taught. Secondly, there was a discussion on this podcast because they really did address everything. The only thing that they haven't yet addressed is something else. I mean, I guess I can ask you, but yeah, we'll see. Was like the number of smaller, seemingly less significant animals and vertebrates and so on and so forth that are killed in their billions by the, shall we call it, plant-based diet umbrella, if that makes sense.
Certainly through the shift from animal agriculture to plants. So if you changed a whole field from cows grazing to it being a crop formation, you can imagine what that would look like and what the impact would be on the environment. So yeah.
There was a discussion about how many certain types of mice are killed. There was a discussion about how many insects and reptiles are killed. And they used the number that they discussed, but perfect disclaimer for anybody listening. I mean, everybody operates on their own version of confirmation bias. In this country, we've got the election happening now, right? And I personally find it unbelievably difficult to try and form a positive, well-formed opinion, because you can't help but, I feel, be listening to someone who's just operating from their own version of confirmation bias. It's so difficult. And diet is exactly the same. My confirmation bias is that being an omnivore is the best thing for me as a human being. So I take on board those things which fulfill my belief. I tried to do something different, and I must admit I did have that kind of vegan honeymoon where to begin with I felt great. Then I didn't. I did not feel great. And yeah, it's
so tricky. It's very tricky. And I think what's really important is something about how much time you spend studying nutritional sciences. And the longer you spend doing that, and I've been a nutritional scientist for 15 years, you understand that actually health lies in the middle of all of these things. One of the issues that we have is that somebody will, so for example, when you mentioned about the salt, I haven't done a huge amount of research in salt, and also actually done quite a lot in salt because of hydration in terms of bowel conditions, but not in healthy people necessarily. But I've spent long enough in my world to be able to contextualize something that you say within a whole body of literature over the last 15 years, as opposed to it being the first piece of information that I've heard about it. So when someone says, people on plant-based diets don't die from heart disease as often. I'm like, well, actually, I've read research that's completely the opposite to that, and that actually there's all this other stuff as well. So let me just run through like my mental stuff. And of course, if there's new things I haven't read, tell me. I want to read them because I want to be able to understand. But we have to be able to contextualize individual pieces of information within a huge body of literature, as opposed to just having one piece of information. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So often we cherry pick this research and we say, this means this, and I can go on, anyone can use PubMed and find out something that proves their point. But if you can't then if you don't have the knowledge and background and all this kind of stuff to contextualize that within a whole ream of research over the last decade, then you're going to struggle to be able to say, actually, I don't think that's right because of this. And I think that's where we fall really foul of a lot of sort of influencers and people who have a really strong bias towards wanting everyone to think one thing. And it's
worth mentioning as well, like one of the things that was on this podcast that resonated with me is that I'm not a scientist, therefore I don't understand how scientists work. Mm-hmm. But one of the things that they talked about is that someone would produce a study, but often studies have weight to them when another scientist looks at that study and can reproduce the same information. So it's easy to do one study, but there's a million studies that haven't been reproduced. And if they've not been reproduced, there's a reason for it. Yeah. That I would genuinely recommend anybody listen to that podcast. But I'm sure that there will be somebody who from the opposite side of that fence that comes out with a podcast proving that Chris Kresser is a lunatic, and he, proves, quote unquote, proves that he's a lunatic and he shouldn't be listened to. It's
a lot of these doctors now who say crazy things. You can actually just look them up on Wikipedia and it tells you that they're crazy, and that is helpful because we must understand people's full motivations about these things, because I think people are prone to take things as an absolute. And of course, we're all capable of being wrong. One of the things I think is interesting when we were talking about the environmental research is that, of course, nutritional science can be interpreted in lots of different ways, and you can sort of take a big body of literature and data. I don't think we've got time to get into it, but you can certainly look at a big study and reinterpret it in a new way and put a completely different spin on it and suggest that it was wrong in the first place. And nutritional data, there's so many things that go into making our diets different. So, for example, the way that I eat is a culmination of my entire life's experience and all the things that I do, and whether I'm busy, whether I'm working, how much money I've got, all these kinds of things. So we know that everyone's diet is the same. So you can't say these people don't eat this and therefore this, because that's not how it works, because there's so many other things that go into that. So, for example, the plant-based community generally are from a much higher socioeconomic bracket than those who are not plant-based or vegetarians, for example. And that has a big impact on all kinds of things in your life, not just how you eat. So having more money has a huge impact on so many things in terms of your health, the determinants of health. And so it's not just your diet, it's all the other things that you do. You're less likely to smoke, you're less likely to live in poverty, you're less likely to be exposed to lots of different things. And so nutrition is so complex, and you can explore it in different ways and re-examine data and present it in a different way. And I think that leaves us really vulnerable to people who have these kind of intentions to maybe manipulate people into doing things that they want to do to make money ultimately.
I think one of the important parts to understand as well is the difficulty comes in the extreme of anything and everything, doesn't it? Like, that's where the difficulty is. If you were to speak to somebody, and if the whole population did a meat-free Monday and I don't know, for want of a better acronym or whatever you call it, but if they were vegan or plant-based or whatever the phrase might be, 2 days a week, and we just really focus for 2 days on getting a rainbow of colours from our vegetables and ate some more exotic vegetables that we don't normally eat, like if we chucked some kimchi in there, or if we had some pomegranate seeds because we don't have them very often, or if maybe bananas aren't our favourite thing, we made sure we had a couple of bananas, whatever it might be, that would be of massive benefit. But I remember being vegan, and if you're not 100% vegan, I remember being part of a discussion group on Facebook, you weren't allowed to talk about palm oil. because like people went crazy about it. Like, oh my God. Like I remember mentioning something even broadly related to it, and the admin messaged me, "Oh, dude, you can't talk about palm oil. Like, I've deleted your post. Don't talk about palm oil, or I'm gonna have to kick you out of the group." And I was like,
Oh, yeah.
okay. But
And
it's
this,
like,
you just really. So I'll tell you a story about this whole thing. So in 2016, I did a TV piece on Victoria, Derbyshire, where I was invited to talk about the rise in plant-based diets. And so often when you do TV, they put you on a panel with people who they sort of put experts next to lay people, which is interesting. But then the two opinions feel that they carry the same weight. Do you see what I mean? So a really great example recently is the anti-vaxxer stuff. So you might have a top endocrinologist or a top scientist, top immunologist who says everyone should be vaccinated, and they put them next to somebody who's decided that they don't want to vaccinate their child, and their two opinions sort of therefore to the general public given the same weight. So I was on this panel discussion with a guy who at the time was crowned the Prince of Vegans. So you may have heard of him. He's a sort of free runner. And
I can't believe you're going to mention this guy. So right. So interestingly enough,
yeah,
one of my best friends knows him.
Okay.
Back in the day, I'm from Derby area. Yeah, Tim Shieff.
Tim Shieff. Yeah. So I was on the program with Tim Shieff, who's obviously at the time very, very much a big vegan proponent.
At the time, yeah.
At the time, yeah. And he was very aggressively telling me that everything I said was wrong, which, you'd expect it. The thing that I said, which caused great controversy, was that it's much more difficult to meet your nutritional requirements on a vegan diet, and I wouldn't encourage any of my patients to turn vegan. And honestly, the abuse that I got as a result of it, which was largely led by Tim, was really horrendous. So people were writing to me saying I should be struck off. People were writing to my governing bodies, writing to King's College at the time, telling me I shouldn't be allowed to work. I got letters saying people are going to come and rape my children. I don't have children, but still, like just this particularly crazy woman wrote me this long letter, which included the sentence, "Even my husband wouldn't have sex with you." I was like, I mean, that's really not my issue. It seems like a you problem, not a me problem.
Seems like quite a big insult to his husband,
well,
maybe.
exactly
I don't know how he would feel about that sentence.
About your problems at home.
Okay.
So it was just really, really awful. It came at a really difficult time in my life as well, which was unfortunate. But you put yourself up for these things.
Yeah.
And of course, fast forward a couple of years, and Tim Shieff is now famously not a vegan anymore because he developed such horrible nutritional deficiencies that he was unable to sustain it. And I wrote to him, and I'd love to have a conversation with him on, publicly about it. But I wrote to him on Twitter and just said, maybe you remember what happened, and what I'd really like to understand from you is what I could have said to you. So basically what I said was, I clearly got my messaging wrong. I couldn't reach you at the time. How could I have phrased things better? What could I have said differently that would have helped you to mitigate for some of those risks at the time? Because maybe you would still be able to be a vegan if you'd supplemented, if you'd acknowledged that there were risks associated, and if you'd planned your diet better. And he said, there's nothing you could have said. There was nothing you could have said. There's no way you could have reached me. At that time, I was completely, everything I read, every discussion group, every scientist I spoke to supported what I was doing. Nobody said, I wasn't listening to anyone who said any of the sort of things that you were saying. And I think that there's a huge issue there, and it's a shame that people have to go through what he went through, both mentally and physically, in order to find that actually health lies in the middle, and that you probably should listen to people who are from a medical background. But I think the point being that it is very difficult. People have to go on their own path and their own journey. But if you are completely indoctrinated by only hearing one side of an argument constantly, you can't reach
the problem in America in politics. Like, I talked about confirmation bias. My limited understanding, but I think I'm correct when I say, is that one side of the political coin listens to, watches and hears and views the same people on their network television reiterating the beliefs they've already got, and then the other side does exactly the same thing, and then you're left with this humongous problem. I should kind of summarize that, and I think you'll probably agree with me that, so back, just quick context, knowing Tim something in the region of 15 years ago, I remember being massively inspired by Tim. His abilities as a free runner, as a break dancer were incredible. He was a genuinely super cool guy. he did have a period of time where it seemed that being vegan, again, from an outside looking in perspective, dramatically increased his abilities as a free runner. Like, he leaned down and he was in really, at least visually, very good shape. He was on the UK's Ninja Warrior and got the furthest. I know that the story I tell people is like, he was on American Ninja Warrior, where obviously it was much bigger. He led Team Europe against America and then the Japanese or East Asian, and he won. Like, Team Europe won with it. Like, it was so cool being able, like, you know, I know him, like, whatever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, and again, like, I've tried to reach out to Tim a few times, like, if he still remembers me. It's 15 years ago, you know, and his life has taken a completely different path. I remember seeing him on Top Gear. Him and a guy free ran and raced James May on Top Gear, and I think he won the race. It was so cool.
Yeah.
But like, I remember when I heard that he was no longer vegan, and I don't know whether it was a mistake or what, but I did look at some of the comments he got on his YouTube videos, and like, people. So I would say, you know, in summary, if somebody chooses to be vegan and that's what they are 100% of the belief, it's the best thing to do, right? People of conviction have changed planet Earth repeatedly over the thousands of years that we've been around. There's nothing wrong with conviction. But at the same time, in a world where the facts, quote unquote, are so murky, I think an open mind and an understanding of compassion and the other traits that make human beings what we are, you know, love, understanding, etc., 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 if they can be used in the same quantity as that certainty and conviction, can you imagine the difference? And I'm probably talking so idealized now that someone could say,
but I agree with you. And I think, you know, my mum said, in like a great mum way, these people are so nice to animals, why are they being so horrible to you? And I think there's something in that, right? Let's just try and treat each other as humans. The really important thing to remember is that your body's needs change through your life. One thing, you know, we're all genetically very different, and a great example of this is that the plant version of omega-3 fatty acids is called ALA. So there's three different omega-3 fatty
lipoic acid, right?
Yeah, so there's ALA, which comes from plants, there's DHA, which comes from fish, and there's EPA, which comes from fish. ALA is pretty useless on its own. We need to convert it into EPA or DHA. So you can get, so you need to convert it. Some people are really efficient at converting the plant-based one into the active components. Genetically, they just are efficient at it, and they can produce a lot more of it, which will keep them well on a plant-based diet for longer. But some people are really bad. Some people genetically can store more vitamin B12, so they'll feel well for longer without getting so much from the diet. You know, there's all these genetic factors that impact our experience of nutrition and how it impacts our health. And so it's really important to have an open mind and think, I'm going to try this for a bit, and if I feel well, then amazing. And if I don't feel well, maybe it's not right for me, and let me try something else. But in the meantime, while we're all so judgmental and we're all so strict and we're so polarized, people end up, you know, just essentially getting really malnourished for the sake of something that feels that could be changed. You know, I think if the vegan community were more open and honest about the risks and the supplements that are required and all this kind of stuff, we would have more people who are able to stay vegan for longer, rather than all these people who feel this horrible shame and guilt for having to go back and receive all the abuse that they do. Because actually, if you just supplemented from the beginning, you'd probably still be a vegan. If Tim had supplemented carefully from the very beginning and taken the advice of conventional nutritionists, like the people in Game Changers do, he probably would be well. But he rejected all conventional science at that time, and that undoubtedly, in my mind, led him down the path that he's gone down.
Yeah, and I think the thing to be taken from that is an understanding of what is best to be done moving forwards. Again, you know, this conversation of ours, I've thoroughly enjoyed, and it's been one of the most intellectually fun conversations I've had so far, just because these are things that I hear people talk about, and it's quite nice to, like, if I could have a podcast with Rhonda Patrick, it'd be amazing. But like, I'm sure I could ask her some similar things that I've asked you and get a different opinion. And this is where being a human being is about choice. We're very, very fortunate that that's the one final thing that can never, ever, ever be taken away from you is choice. You can choose how to think. You can choose how to feel. If I was sat talking to you on this podcast and you were a vegan, you wouldn't change my mind because I have the freedom of choice. I might already be partially of the same opinion as you, and you might help reinforce a new belief. But if I tested it out and then I talked to somebody else in a year, I'm a person who I hope that my friends and family would agree with me. If I have to take it on the chin and go, I was wrong. Yeah, I was wrong. I'm going to do something different moving forward because that was wrong. I'll be that way. And I think you seem like that as well.
Yeah, I'd love to.
If it's a dietitian, you end up having to give the opposite advice in a year because new research proves our previous opinions wrong. That's part of being a scientist, isn't it?
Totally. And I think there's a massive issue with people who, particularly healthcare professionals, who have made their decision completely and don't have an open mind about these things, because every year new research comes out, and every year, we have new information that we need to work on, and we need to be able to reflect, and we need to be able to give new messages. And if I'd have been saying for the last, 6 years, everyone should eat meat, everyone should be eating a load of meat, everyone should be eating as much meat as possible, and then all this new research comes out and I'm like, oh, actually, I was wrong, it might be embarrassing for me. But fortunately, I've always been like, it's much more difficult. If you want to do it, that's the right thing to do. Eat more plants, definitely the right thing to do. Just be a bit careful with nutritional deficiencies. And ultimately, I sort of feel like that's the way you've got to do it with everything. There's plenty of doctors out there saying everyone should be on a low carb, high fat diet, and that will not give you heart disease. That's not quite right. And if a new paper comes out, they're likely to have to deny it because they've built their whole reputation on this one thing that might be wrong. And I think we've kind of, with medicine in particular and social media, we've got to be really careful about being open to new research and new things coming out and being wrong. And if we hang our hats really firmly on like one position and we make a lot of money from that position, we're at high risk of not being open to some of this new research that comes out every day, every week, And
the responsibility now of, the social media has, and we were talking right at the beginning of this podcast about all these new things that you want to explore. And that's one of the crazy exciting things about 2019, that you get to have experiences, and so do I, that would never have been possible, before this MacBook was created that I'm recording this podcast on, before Skype came about, before. But it does bring with it things that we need to learn, and we need to be adaptable and open-minded because, let's say, for example, in 5 years' time, this podcast has got 10 million people have listened to it. If we sit here and go, no, this is fact, we influence a bunch of people that, that's kind of our responsibility, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? So, yeah, without feeling like I am directionless as far as where we are in the discussion at the minute, and wanting to be conscious of your time, I tend to wrap my podcasts up with 3 questions. And I think it's a really cool way for us to do this in the physical perspective because of what we've talked about. I normally ask people, as far as physical wellness goes, you personally, Sophie, what are your important tenets? What are you doing to make sure, with everything that you know, that you try and take care of yourself physically? What's important to you?
So having done all kinds of different exercise through my life for various different reasons, it's very important to me to do some sort of movement that I enjoy. So we were talking before we started recording about boxing being a big part of my life, and I love that. It's great for me.
Yeah.
It's been really amazing. Yeah, been really amazing way for me to build a community of friends as well in London, which has been brilliant. So I love boxing and I love combat sports, but I also love swimming and I love yoga, and I love, I'm very fortunate to enjoy exercise very much. But there are plenty of people out there who are, and I've fallen foul of it before. I used to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and run 10K and not realise that I was making myself ill and having to take painkillers every day to sort my joints out and stuff like that. I think we need to find some sort of movement that suits us and that makes us feel well, and do it at a time of day that is right for us. So yeah, movement is really important to me. I don't eat a lot of meat at home, and that's important to me. So I was vegetarian for a long time growing up, and I find that and I grew up in Devon as well, so I'm very aware of animal agriculture and what good farming looks like and what good farming doesn't look like. And I think it's quite hard to buy good quality meat that's been farmed in an ethical way in supermarkets. So in general, I'll eat mostly plant-based at home, and certainly not vegan, but definitely plant-based most of the time, unless I'm cooking for friends or whatever. But when I eat out, I eat what I want to eat in good quality restaurants, so that I'm eating good quality, hopefully eating better quality meat. What else do I do? Movement, exercise, and the most important thing for me as a human is how can I put it? Company of others, platonic love, being part of a community and being loved and spending time with friends and family is just the biggest thing for me in terms of me being happy and well. So those are three big things.
Falls into what the second question was going to have been: mental wellness. How do you cover that base? And I'm guessing the answer will be what you just said.
Yeah, eating with friends and family. So feeding people, but also going out to eat with people is a big part of my quality of life. Making sure that I am invested in people and people are invested in me from a well-being perspective is really, really important. Those sorts of things are just, the best thing. I've just opened this, working with a company, we've opened this new wellbeing centre in Farringdon, which is recognition that everyone has a different way of coming to a sort of meditative state or mental peace. And there's all kinds of exciting tech in there, including flotation pods, which I know Joe Rogan has got one in his house.
Okay, well, I don't know if it's his house, but his podcast setup, that's for me, is the goal. He has everything and anything there. It's so amazing. I've never seen it visually because I listen to him rather than watch him. But I've heard him talk about the sauna and the float tank and the plunge pool and the gym, and it'd be amazing to have that kind of space.
Well, we've got that now, which is so great, and I'm running my clinics from there, which is even greater for me. So there's flotation tanks, there's cryo chamber, there's light therapy, there's infrared saunas, there's all sorts of different things. So I think there's a really nice opportunity for us to bring tech into a space that actually is for mental well-being, which I really like and I think is really important.
We haven't touched on that anywhere near as much as I guess I kind of did originally plan to when that was something we talked about beforehand. But I'm also conscious again of taking up too much of your time. So I would be interested in coming to check that out. Mm-hmm. Where is Farringdon?
So it's in central London. So really central London. And it's really well connected by transport as well. The centre's about 5 minutes from Farringdon station.
And your spa is called?
It's called Nemea. Nemea Mind Gym. Yeah, Mind Station, sorry. I'll give you some links and you can link it up.
Amazing. And I'll put it on the Instagram. We can get your Instagram and your website and everything in the show notes. So then when you guys get this shared out for us, people know because they're nearer to you than I certainly am up here in the sticks. Cool. As far as people being able to stay in touch with you, Sophie, moving forwards and gain more of your fantastic knowledge, where's the best place for people to check you out? Is it Instagram or are you more active elsewhere?
No, so Instagram is my most active platform and it's at Sophie Dietitian. Most people can't spell dietitian, it's spelled with 2 T's instead of a C. So the American correction.
That is how I spelt it when I first attempted and was like, why can't I find it? And I just...
Exactly. So 2 T's. And the website, which is my company, is City Dietitians. So it's citydietitians.co.uk.
Amazing. Yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you so very much for taking the time out again, and so artfully placing boxing gloves in the background for us to have that as the conversation. Cool. Cheers, Sophie.
Thanks for having me.
This is Dan Ball from Wellness Academy. I really hope you enjoyed this podcast. Please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you're listening right now. You'll find a link on the episode notes. Just tap or swipe over the cover art. You'll also see some offers from our sponsor, Lichfield Apart Hotel. Find them at lichfieldaparthotel.com, and we hope you'll support our show by supporting them. If you like what you've heard, we'd love it if you could give us a 5-star rating and tell your friends how to subscribe. Another way to support us is to answer a short survey at yourwellnessacademy.co.uk/survey. And tell us what wellness topics you'd like to hear about. I'm your host, Dan Ball. Our producer is Scott Towns, created by our executive producer, Ben Heathcote, for Wellness Academy.